Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. And yes, this is absolutely like the next take from the last video that I did. So, a lot of guys have asked me about this too, and I wanna provide a little bit of a perspective on it, based on some pros and cons that deal with this. So, a lot of guys have asked me about the RMR that's sitting atop this rifle, right? They asked me, "What do you think about that? Do you think it's going to survive? And what are your pros and cons for it?" and that kind of deal. And it's something that I knew I was going to eventually have to do a video on. I just didn't realize how fast that was going to turn into a thing. So, essentially, here we go. And again, you're going to have to really excuse the wind here. I'm just going to try and up the volume and on my voice, and we'll go from there. Now, first thing, let's talk about the the pros about mounting one of these guys up. First, Trijicon specifically designed the Type 1 RMR to be mounted to rifles. They thought about a lot of guys that are running PDW style guns. They thought a lot about guys that are running dots on shotguns, that kind of deal. And for those of you that don't know, they also acknowledged the fact that a lot of Ultimacs were riding on a lot of AKs, right? It was part of their thought process to designing this thing. Now, the issues with the Type 1 RMR mostly have to relate to pistols, like flickering of the dot and that kind of thing. There is far less shock, there's far less abuse, there's far less movement and vibration when this is on a rifle versus a pistol. So as far as the dot flickering and terminal issues and that kind of thing, they're about non-existent on rifles, which is fantastic. Now, a lot of guys will simply say, hey, well, why not just use a T1 and that kind of thing? And I can understand it when we start going about the cons, but here are the pros. The first pro is obviously its footprint. It's small, right? It's small, it's light, and with like an American Defense mount or something on it, which is a mount that I personally prefer. I love American Defense and their mounts. It makes it very portable, very easy to use, very easy to mount up. And what's cool about it too is that it's very easy to zero. Now, as far as its weight savings and all that stuff, the next two big pros to this is that on a rifle that generates a lot of heat, especially where this is excellent for resisting that, and it does a really good job as far as just dealing with what comes in the package of an AK, right? So if you want to mount it to an AR or something, it's even less, because there's just less stuff going on as far as heat and all that. Now, what's great about it as well is that a lot of guys talk about parallax issues. A lot of guys talk about just field of view and that kind of thing. And some manufacturers approach it differently. Like, for instance, the EOTech approaches field of view in a way that what you see up front is a television screen, essentially, large enough to give you good field of view as you're looking through it. The guys that messed with the RMR approached it in a different light, to where when you mount this thing up, the body of the optic itself is so small that it doesn't really factor in what's going on with your vision. It just kind of snaps up in place, the dot just kind of floats in space, and if you're doing, and if you're in the middle of a drill, or you have some kind of shooting which forces you to snap the gun up and go kind of fast, which is the point of this, right? You don't even really notice the body of the thing at all. As far as tint of the glass and that kind of thing, it's no worse than something like a T1, for example, right? To where if you do, like, the first couple of times that you mount it up in your house or whatever, it's not a big, like, you'll notice it, for sure, it's there. But when you start shooting, when you start zeroing even, it goes away. It really does go away. A con to all tinted screens like this, though, is that stuff that has like a olive drab, like a greenish hue, that's really flat, hides from you a little bit better. That's just a fact, you know. But then again, you have that issue with a T1 as well. So, if me personally, if I'm shooting like the dueling tree plates behind me there at like 100 or a little over 100, it starts to get difficult to see them. But again, the tinted screen is an issue that all optics have of this size and of this format, for the most part. I say for the most part because not all of them hashtag not all. Right? So there it is. Another really good plus to this optic is that it mounts up to its mount in a very secure manner. Now, you guys may or may not notice that there are a pair of screws, right? These two screws are actually deceptively long. You think that they're going to be shorter than they actually are, but then you start to unscrew them. Or you have a set of screws that come with your American Defense mount also. So, you don't have to mix match the two screw lengths or anything like that. But for like pistol plates, or in this case, the American Defense mount, the screws are deceptively long and stout, like they're thick, right? What that is as far as a pro is that they're large enough and they're long enough to where when those two screws are set in with Loctite to their base for the mount and all that, they hook up in a very, very secure manner. Also, in the very front underside of the optic, there's two sets of holes that the mount sets into. Like, for instance, imagine this mount as just like a flat plate and then two raised cylindrical surfaces that stick up from the very front end of the mount itself that's set into this optic. So you have like the basic footprint where it sets into place originally, and then proportionally speaking, and then two huge screws that go through it and bolt it into place. It's a very, very tight way of, or a very, very secure way of mounting up the optic to its mount. And proportionally speaking, it's more secure than what I would say like an Aimpoint T1 is, which has 4 real small screws to press in, again, proportionally a larger optic into the same size mounting surface. See what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's a way that they approached it, and I really do like that, because I've had zero shift of any kind, and that was after this was sitting on top of like an M&P core. So after doing a lot of shooting with that pistol and then putting it on this rifle, I've had no zero shift, which is great. So, I mean, as far as that's concerned, the pros are a lot, right? Now, here are a couple of cons, and one of these might be detrimental for guys that are considering doing this. Now, first thing, the first con that I noticed is more of an annoyance rather than a game breaker, is that on the Type 1, when you're trying to adjust for elevation and windage, these turrets, number one, they're 1-minute adjustments. Now, for a lot of guys, automatically, that's not precise enough, and I totally get that. I completely understand why some guys would just be turned off by 1-minute adjustments. I get it. The second one is that you really have to like rip off your ear pro, get your head pretty close, and listen, because it's not tactile. Like, you don't feel it snicking, and you barely hear it. Now, from what I understand, the Type 2s correct this issue, right? So for guys that are looking at Type 2s, this issue or con is null and void. But the Type 1 and Type 2 have this next con, which can be a big deal for lots of guys, and it could turn a lot of people off from a rifle specifically. Now, in order to project the dot onto the glass, there's an emitter that houses itself right inside of here. If anything covers that emitter, the dot, you don't see the dot in the glass because it's not being projected onto it, right? It's being projected onto whatever covered it. Mud, snow, that kind of thing. So you really do have to be cognizant of that. And yeah, it's kind of hard to get in there and cover it, but as a lot of people know, snow gets into everything, right? Snow will if it's hard packed well enough, it'll stop people from looking at their Comp M4s, their EOTechs, that kind of thing. And sometimes it takes a little while for the guns to shake them out under recoil, right? So that is a possible ding that would really throw a lot of people away from this optic, because it's like, too exposed. And I thoroughly understand that. And it's even more so a possible issue on a rifle. And I acknowledge that on this gun wholeheartedly, right? I acknowledge that is an issue that is a possible issue that I'm going to have to deal with. The way that I approached it, though, is that If it's to the point where something's covering up the glass, it's probably covering up most of it anyway, and I need to go to the quick release, rip it off, and use the irons anyhow. And that's the same like method of work that I've pushed into stuff like when I have an Aimpoint T1 mounted up or something similar, right? And all it really takes is for you to clog up that rear glass really, really good before you have to essentially rip the optic off and either pocket it or leave it there and then go back to work. So there is that. But I acknowledge thoroughly that this area in here would probably be a lot easier to fill up with mud and snow and stuff like that, because it kind of sits in its own little indentation like a little bowl, pretty much inviting Murphy to fuck with you. See what I'm saying? So I acknowledge that thoroughly, you know, and if you hadn't considered it, you should. I mean, it'll turn a lot of guys off, but it's better to figure that out and to hear that from someone who's had to deal with similar things before, than think it's the greatest thing ever, and then encounter that issue possibly during something really important. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, realistically speaking, those are the only real cons that I have on it. You know, one is fixed by the newer iteration of the optic, and the other two are kind of inherent with the optic itself. Now, me personally, would I have rather had like half-minute adjustments like most other red dots out there? Absolutely. I absolutely wish that were the case. Do I personally wish that it wasn't as exposed to outside things messing with it? For sure. You know, guys that are messing around with pistols, like that being on a carry piece for their pistol, this isn't anywhere near as much of a problem for you because it's concealed and it's essentially shielded away from all that shit as best as possible. On a rifle, though, it's a far greater concern, and it's something that I really do think that you should be prepared to deal with if you mount that to a rifle. Now, if you don't see that becoming a really big issue, okay, great. If you want to mount it up to a, quote, go-to-war rifle or something like that, first of all, it is tough to deal. It is tough enough to deal with all of that shit. But you are going to have to keep it out of things. You are going to have to shield it and be cognizant of those issues a little bit more than something like a Comp M4 or a T1 or something like that, right? So, there you go. Now, if you would like to come out and train with us, I'm going to leave a link in the description below to our website. There are all the classes that are currently available, and more are being posted on a pretty much a regular basis. So I would keep tabs with that. If you have any questions on it, on the website and in like the class information, there's contact information for me. If you have questions for a class, if you have questions as to whether or not you think you're ready for a class, because I get a lot of those, chances are, yeah, you're just fine. But you know, if you want to ask those questions, go ahead. I get it. People don't want to be that guy in class. But you know, if you want to check that out, go ahead. If you want to support us through Patreon and see what it is that we do for you, I would absolutely check that out as well. There are a couple of really big advantages to that, because first of all, you know, for $35 a month, you can train with us for as much and as long as you want, so long as you're signed up with that. Look at our full price and the math works itself out. And the money that we use from Patreon goes to soldiers to train them up essentially for free. No flight, no food, none of that. Nothing that they have to pay for anyway. And if you want to join the discussion group on Facebook, that's a great idea too. I mean, we have a pretty good group of guys. There's over 16,000 people on it that converse in all manner of ways. A lot of questions that you guys have are answered there by a large group of really smart guys. Even if it's not me that's answering the question, there's also different perspectives. And I acknowledge that there are different perspectives. That's why a group like this exists. You know, I am a opinion, not the opinion. So there you go. There's a lot of consumer-friendly stuff that's there because of that opinion. So there's that. So, yeah, I mean, draw the conclusions that you want about this particular optic and make smart decisions, really. And the whole point of this video is just to kind of give you a little bit of the what for and why is on the optic itself, so that, again, you can make an educated decision as to what exactly you want. And if what exactly you want is not this optic, I totally get it. You know, me personally, I acknowledge what its faults could possibly be, and as far as running it is concerned, I essentially do my best to kind of shield it from really bad stuff that would get in there. And I acknowledge wholeheartedly that it's more so than that of like a T1 or something, right? But I still have the same methodology for dealing with said things, because on a T1 or on a EOTech or an Aimpoint Comp M4 or something, if that rear portion of the glass is stuffed with stuff, the standard fare for me is to rip the thing off, get the iron sights set up, and go to work. So I realize that, yeah, it does have its own cons, but unless I have a more serious reason not to use it, I'm just going to keep running it. And if I'm proved wrong, if it dies, if it impacts something and splits open like a freaking banana peel, you guys will be the first to know, right? So there it is, guys. So with all that being said, remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.